going on, guys? It's Cimo coming back at you guys with yet another live duel commentary. So for this match, we have Pendulum Magician on the left, touted as one of the strongest decks of the upcoming format, going up against Sky Striker on the right. Now, Sky Striker did have multi-row gold 1 on the past Forbidden and Limited list for this new format. However, I don't really think that matters too much because I think the deck is still very playable and possibly still a tier 1 contender. And if you're going to be in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area on August 17th and 18th, be sure to come to the Pro Play Games Tour event. There's a $2,000 prize pool up for grabs, only 20 bucks to enter, and I'll be there doing live stream commentary for the event. So check out the links in the description, and I hope to see you guys there. So we see the Sky Striker player kicking things off. It actually looked like he used a Foolish Burial Goods to send a Metal Foes fusion, shuffle that back into the deck to get an extra draw, and now we see a normal summon of Ray to kind of get everything going here. But it looks like he's just going to go straight into Shizuku, and that's going to force an end phase search for the engage. So this is what happens. Sky Striker can sometimes have a slow start if it isn't able to access engage. Engage is like kind of like the deck's win condition to an extent. However, this is going to be a bit of a slow start here, and I think Pendulum will be able to take advantage of this quite significantly with only one back row. I mean, even if that is a Widow Anchor in the Sky Striker player's back row, he's only going to be able to negate an effect. He won't even be able to steal a monster. However, Sky Striker is rather resilient. It does play a lot of hand traps sometimes as well, depending on the build, so we're going to have to see. We see a Spell Power Mastery kicking things off for the Pendulum Magician player, and that's pretty big. That's going to allow him to go directly for his Servant of Endymion, most likely. And by allowing him to do that, he can start accumulating spell counters, get himself to a Master Endymion, and quite frankly, I think that's what you're trying to do in this Sky Striker matchup if you are a Pendulum Endymion player, because if you can get Master to stick with a spell counter on it, I actually do not think Sky Striker has a way to out that whatsoever. So that's what I would be trying to go for here. We see a Curtain Raiser being played in the scale, giving a spell counter to it, and then he's going to go ahead and special summon the Curtain Raiser directly from the Pendulum Zone. Normal summon of Dark Worm. This is a pretty good start here. He's now going to be able to add that gate 0, get himself that low scale. He can go into Electromite, and again, he just needs a couple more cards to be able to resolve that Endymion here. Well, that could be a couple Pendulum Scales. I mean, there's just plenty of ways he can access it. This is looking pretty solid for the Pendulum Magician player. We haven't seen anything else from the Sky Striker player as of yet. Remember, he does have Engage in his hand, so that means he only has, I believe, one other card in his hand that could potentially be some sort of disruption, like a hand trap or anything like that. Oh, it looks like 2 cards, excuse me, the Engage and 2 other cards. Now, the Pendulum Magician player just contemplating here how he wants to go about doing this. He could go into Electromite. He could play one of his cards, like he could play the Gate 0, for instance, pop it, and then he could go ahead and play another scale. That would boost Endymion to 3, and then he could go ahead and resolve Endymion to special summon Master. There's a lot of ways he could go about doing it. It's just difficult to say, just depending on the composition of his hand, what he's going to do. He is going to go for that Electromite, though. That's something that most of us probably expected here. He did have to use the normal summon, but it's fine. He has not Pendulum summoned yet. That's the most important part, so that means he's going to be able to take advantage of those Electromite arrows. So Chronograph Sorcerer going in the scale, it's going to tick the Servant up to 2. Chronograph Sorcerer could use its effect. I don't really know if there's tons of value in doing that just to get that Time Gazer. However, it is a line of play he could take. He could go ahead and just Pendulum Summon for 2 here out of the Pendulum Zones, and then however many monsters he wants out of his hand, because he does have a low and a high scale here. So he's going to go ahead and get Curtain Raiser as well as the Dark Worm, and it looks like he's going to go for the Gate 0 as well. Oh man, he might just go for everything, and a Jackal King as well as an Aether, the Empowerment Dragon. So just dumping everything onto the board, man. Could you imagine if there was a Solemn Strike in the Sky Striker player's back row? Oh man, that would be huge. So, a little bit greedy there. I mean, sometimes you do have to worry about Striker playing cards like that, but we do see Aether triggering its effect to be able to banish Ray from the, or excuse me, the Shizuku from the field, which will ultimately trigger the Ray. However, he is going to use the Jackal King's effect to remove the counters off of his Servant to negate Ray's recursion ability. So that's actually a really good way to prevent Ray from tagging back in to go into something like a Kagari or a Kaina or anything like that. And this could give the Pendulum player the opening line that he needs to potentially be able to go in and just OTK. Now, oh, we see an Effect Veiler being used in response. Okay, so Veiler is being used to negate Jackal King, and so that means Ray will tag out and come onto the field, which means Ray can go into something else at any given time. Again, Kaina might be a good solution here to just pretty much prevent him from dying, but with an entire board of 6 monsters from the Pendulum Magician player. He's got a lot to work with here. I mean, there's a lot of cards in that extra deck that he could definitely take advantage of, and we're gonna have to see how he decides to go about doing this. The thing is, if he wants to try to just force the Ray off the field, he does have to at least bait it in some way to be able to force the Kaina or the Kagari or whatever he would tag out into. Again, like I said, most likely Kaina, but it looks like he's now just going ahead and scrolling through his extra deck to try to find something for this particular instance. I don't know if there's too many cards he could potentially play here that would be able to OTK through a Ray that has a tag out. I could be wrong, but at the same time, I think if I were the Pendulum Magician player, I wouldn't focus on that as much, and just focus on setting up a board where you could potentially just negate the copy of Engage that you know the Striker player has, because then that way, if you can take away all their resources, it doesn't matter if you can't kill them, you effectively won the game by overwhelmingly controlling the board, which is ironically what Sky Striker does most of the time. So this is where you kind of have to know your role and just set up to the best of your ability. We do see a Guard Dragon LP coming down, so we could see some Guard Dragon shenanigans here, which that would be really solid. That means he could get into Vortex Dragon being an Omni Negate, so it could stop literally anything during the Sky Striker player's turn. I'm not sure if how many other cards that he has access to, or what's in his extra deck specifically to be able to make any accurate predictions, but if he was able to go into stuff, you know, like if he was able to get spell counters to get that Jackal King back up, that's another negation, which that also works when the Sky Striker player uses spells as well. We see Electromite popping the Chronograph, and he's going to go ahead and draw a card there off of Electromite's third effect. Now he's going to go ahead and link off into presumably the Triple Burst Dragon so that he can begin doing the Guard Dragon combos. There it is. And now he's going to go ahead and use the effect of LP. We're going to see if there's any other response here. Remember, there is one other card, I believe, in the Sky Striker player's hand. And I was going to go and get Destrudo. Okay, so Destrudo does give him access to another tuner, so there is a potential here that if he's playing FA Dawn Dragster, that could be another spell negate that he could put up to pretty much solidify his position here. So there's the Agripane. I can go ahead and get out the copy of Vortex Dragon, but we see this is where the Sky Striker player is going to opt to tag out Ray, because he knows if that Vortex Dragon comes down, it's not going to be able to resolve, so he does have to do this now. He's going to use it to stop Aether from being able to attack, and now Vortex Dragon has hit the field. So now he's going to go ahead and use Vortex Dragon's ability, since it was special summoned, to go ahead and bounce a card on the field back to the hand. And looking at his hand, the Sky Striker player looks like he has all spells, so no other disruption. Kaina's going to go back to the extra deck. And with a hand of Sky Striker, Engage, and 2 other spells, this is not looking too good here for our Sky Striker player. And it looks like he's going to possibly link off here again. He is locked into dragons because he does have the Guard Dragons on the field, so do keep that in mind. He does have to clear that off. But by doing so, he could go ahead and make Hieratic Spheres. He could Destrudo back and, oh, looks like he's going to go to battle phase first and attack with the Agripane. And the Sky Striker player might just scoop it up, yeah. That's pretty much it. The Sky Striker player has seen enough. Like I was going to say, even if he wasn't able to win through all that, he would have just been able to easily just set up a board of Spheres, Dawn Dragster, Vortex Dragon, plus Jackal King, which would have easily just out-resourced everything that the Sky Striker player would have had. So it's interesting, going into game 2, the Sky Striker player is opting to go second. So we see a Servant of Endymion being played first, Pot of Desires, which is going to be met with Ash Blossom. That does, I believe, still give the counter to Servant, because it's just negating the effect with Desires, not negating the activation. But that's it. The Pendulum player has no other follow-up play. He really needed that Desires to resolve. So now we have play going past over to the Sky Striker player. We see a copy of Terraforming come down, searching a copy of Area 0. And I believe I saw a Droll and Lockbird in the Pendulum Magician player's hand. Possibly not. I mean, he could have just used it right then and there. Oh, he is. Okay, I was going to say, he did search, so there's really no reason not to let him get any other searches if it's not absolutely necessary. So we see the Sky Striker player just setting a card and passing. Wow, okay, so the hand traps really showing their worth here. Both these players have a bit weaker of hands as compared to normal, because one hand trap just stopping both of these decks dead in their tracks. Here we see a normal summon of Time Gazer Magician with Chronograph being played in the scale, but now we see Servant of Endymion's effect, and that is going to special summon itself, as well as a monster that can take a spell counter and put it directly onto the field. So again, this is where you want to go for that Endymion Mighty Master of Magic. Unfortunately, he does have to check his banished pile with Pot of Desires, because if he banished Endymion, he will not be able to summon it. He does have one though, so that's good. So now he gets to place, I believe, a spell counter on each one of these, and this is gonna be difficult. The Sky Striker player does have to deal with this Endymion now, which cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. So we're going to see, it looks like the Sky Striker player possibly had a response, because there was a little bit of downtime, but he is just throwing his hand down, signifying that it's probably good for the Pendulum player to decide what he wants to do next. He can go ahead and link off the Time Gazer plus the Servant for an Electromite if he so wishes. That would allow him to just kind of jumpstart things. He could like pop his own chronograph to draw a different card. Just probably just a way to advance his game state at this point. Again, the Sky Striker player with only one set card in his back row. So we're going to have to see what he's able to do here. He's got his hand on the Servant. This signifies that he's probably going to do something here. Remember, he has already used his normal summon, so he can't normal summon something like a Dark Worm or anything like that. So he's going to go ahead and link off for the Electromite, as I predicted. Now we can go ahead and send anything from his deck to the extra monster zone, and then pop that chronograph if he wants to just get that card directly to his hand. He has not Pendulum summoned yet. Do keep that in mind as well. So if he is able to assemble scales here, he can just go off incredibly hard. Oh, but it looks like there was a hand trap. I'm going to go ahead and assume that was an Effect Veiler. Effect Veiler would negate Electromite from being able to send to the extra deck. It would also negate the other effects that Electromite has as well. Does keep the arrows, but he cannot complete his scale, so it doesn't look like he's going to be able to swing in for a lot of damage here. So he is going to go ahead and attack though, so the Electromite's going to swing in for 18, and Damien's going to swing in for, I believe, 2,800 to 3,000. It's a really big monster, whatever it is. But definitely going to take the Sky Striker player to under half of his life points. Now we see the Sky Striker player's turn coming back around. He's going to go ahead and start things off with his copy of Area 0, and this is going to allow him to possibly get into a copy of Ray. So the thing is that Mighty Master of Magic is going to prove to be very difficult here for the Sky Striker player. However, it possibly looks like he might have a response here. Both players seem to be talking over. It looks like the Sky Striker player, the Pendulum Magician player might be opting to want to use the effect of the Master to potentially negate an effect. And he is, so he's going to go ahead and use that. He's going to negate the effect of the Area 0, and then he gets to bounce the Endymion back to his hand. I don't necessarily know if that's correct, because like I said, I'm fairly certain this deck has 0 outs to a Mighty Master of Magic. I mean, it's not like, that's not like they can't play Kaijus or anything, but it just seems like it would be a little bit preposterous, I would say, to kind of take your ultimate win condition against this deck and take it away. We see a Widow Anchor on the Electromite plus an Afterburner to take it out, as well as the chronograph scale because of the secondary effect of Afterburner, obviously signifying that he has 3 spells in grave. And now play going back to the Pendulum Magician player, but now looking at his hand, it looks like there's a Ghost Ogre, an Aether, and I can't make out what that middle card is there, but now it doesn't look like he has any, it's probably, oh, it's the Endymion, because he bounced that back to his hand. So now it looks like he has the ability to make scales here, but he doesn't really have a lot of plays. He can go for the Chronograph Sorcerer. Chronograph will go ahead and hit 2,000. So the Sky Striker player is on very little life, but there's another copy of Area 0, and this could very easily get the Sky Striker player right back into it. There's a Widow Anchor, so he is going to hit. Widow Anchor can now take that Chronograph Sorcerer because we know he has 3 spells in grave. I couldn't tell what that card was that he sent with the Area 0, but this could be the break the Sky Striker player needed to just get right back in this game. We know he has the Widow Anchor. There's just a lot, there's a lot that can happen here. He could pop that Area 0 potentially. We're just gonna have to see what else he has. So he's gonna set a card, and he's gonna pass. So Widow Anchor essentially just being his line of defense here to try to stop him from losing the game outright. And we see, I think that was a Dark Worm top deck from the Pendulum Magician player. And it was. So there's Dark Worm. Now, the thing is, the Sky Striker player has to take the Chronograph Sorcerer with the Widow Anchor, because otherwise, if he took Dark Worm, Chronograph Sorcerer could kill his own Dark Worm. And I'm not sure exactly what the life is on, but he is on probably around 1,000 life at most at this point. So it's going to be tough. He has to use that Widow Anchor defensively. As much as he would like to stop the negation of this Dark Worm, he needs to protect himself and make sure he has another turn to survive to possibly see game 3. Now, the one sigh of relief here from the Sky Striker player is that there is only one copy of Electromite legal in the game, so he can't really do a whole lot here with his Chronograph as well as his Dark Worm. So he can't clear Chronograph out of his extra monster zone to really do anything, and that's actually pretty nice. He could potentially do something like, I mean, I think he has Beat Cop in his extra deck. He could like link both of those off to make that. But then if he does that, the Sky Striker player can use Widow Anchor to take Beat Cop before the Pendulum Summon happens. So again, he won't actually lose as a result of that. So here comes Beat Cop. And again, this is where you have to drop Widow Anchor if you have it, because otherwise it's just game over. He's going to have way too many monsters to kill you. Widow Anchor steals the Beat Cop. And again, he can still Pendulum Summon Chronograph back. But at this point, like, do you want to kill your own Beat Cop just to get in 600 more damage? I mean, that could be relevant at this point if the game is this slow. But again, one good draw from the Sky Striker player could just completely turn this around. I still disagree a little bit with bouncing the Endymion back to hand, because like I said, I don't think Sky Striker has if they have an out, it's not a very simple out to be able to get to it. So we're just going to have to see. I feel like that kind of would have sealed the game up a little bit quicker, regardless of if the Sky Striker player were to resolve that first copy of Area 0. But again, I can also see the argument why you would want to, just to pretty much, if their hand was already that bad in the first place, maybe they just have no follow-up whatsoever. There's a reinforcement of the army off the top, and that's going to get him Array, and this is exactly what I was worried about now. So as a result of this, he can go ahead and use Ray. He can get Kagari to go ahead and Widow Anchor something back that his opponent, or excuse me, that's in his graveyard, to steal something from his opponent. So he could steal that Beat Cop and actually be able to link up into something much higher than he normally would be able to otherwise, or he just wants to set up defensively here. He gets to use the Area 0 Ray combo to be able to dig another card out of his deck potentially. There's a lot he can do now just by ripping that copy of Reinforcement of the Army off the top of his deck. Plenty of spells in the grave, so that's something he doesn't have to worry about in the slightest. He might actually want to opt for the Afterburner here, because if he goes for Afterburner, he can not only take out one of the monsters, but he can wreck the scales, which is also very significant. There's a Shark Cannon off the top, as well as a Drones. I think Shark Cannon's probably the card you want to take. Drones doesn't really do too much here. Shark Cannon would be nice because it could just possibly just be any sort of graveyard disruption that he might need. But Shark Cannon can also take the monster out of the grave too, since he does have over 3 spells in grave. So at this point, it looks like he might be opting to go for Hayate to swing in directly, possibly send a copy of Engage and then recur it with Kagari just to get the value there. But with only one other card in hand from the Pendulum Magician player, you know, it might just be more beneficial, like I said, to possibly go the Afterburner route and just kind of try to blow out all of his cards and just take control of the game from that point. Looks like he's just contemplating what his best line of attack is here. Because again, it's very tricky. He probably, like I said, he's got to be on like 1,000 life points at this point at most. So he can't really afford to make any mistakes. He needs to make sure that he deals with the board effectively enough, but also still has defensive options in case the Pendulum player is able to keep their scales up or can reassemble them. Just the Pendulum summoning mechanic in general is just ridiculous for being able to come back into games as long as you can get those 2 scales. So Hayate is going to actually attack over the Beat Cop. And so that's going to be just a small amount of damage, nothing too significant here. But now he will get to send the copy of Engage. Now again, like I was saying before, he could go for the Afterburner play here, and that would be pretty big, but Engage is also going to be getting him extra draws, so he might want to be going that way instead. So main phase 2, going to tag out Hayate for Kagari. Kagari is going to add back the Engage, then he can go ahead and use that Engage. Go ahead and search any Sky Striker card out of his deck, and then he can go ahead and draw a card in addition to that. But surprisingly, it looks like he's going to go into a Shizuku here? It does. Okay, so he's going for the Shizuku. Now he's going to go ahead and use Engage. maybe opting for something like the, I was going to say, oh, it's interesting, because I was wondering why he tagged out Kagari first. He's going to go for multi-roll. Multi-roll is a really good way to kind of, again, keep your defensive options available, because if you have enough spells, he can use something like the Shark Cannon to be able to add a counter, or not a counter, but a one tick, I guess you could say, to the multi-roll. Drew and Ash Blossom, that could be a pretty significant card depending on what the Pendulum Magician player has. It's not usually the most effective hand trap, but if he has something like a Pen Call or like a Spell Power Mastery, another Pot of Desires, you know, Ash could be a very good card to clench that out. But at this point, he needs to try to figure out how to get as many spells being used while multi-roll is active as possible, because then that way he can get his Widow Anchors out of the graveyard. He can get like his Engage out of the graveyard. He can get Afterburner out of the graveyard. There's a lot he could do here. We're just gonna have to see what he goes about. I mean, you can just see there's at least like 8 spells in the Sky Striker player's graveyard at this point. So there's a lot he can do. It looks like he might be... He also does have the possibility to get something with Shizuku as well for the following turn. So again, he's just trying to figure out how at this point he just can last one more turn, because if he can get one more turn... Oh, he's going to end phase. Okay, so Shizuku's going to activate here. He's going to get Eagle Booster. Now, this is big, because with Eagle Booster, he can use the Shark Cannon as well as the Eagle Booster during the end phase, put 2 ticks up on multi-roll, and then he can potentially just recur the cards that he wants out of the graveyard, with multi-roll being used last in the sequence here. All right, so now we have the Shark Cannon being used in the end phase. And he's going to go ahead and just get rid of, looks like the Beat Cop. And now it looks like he's going to possibly... you have to use the Eagle Booster here, too. Eagle Booster is a way that you just don't lose at this point, because... Oh, and there's an Ogre for the multi-roll! Oh my god! That's huge. Now, the one saving grace here is that Shizuku is powering down all of those monsters by a significant amount. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think there's like 10 spells in the graveyard. So Shizuku is powering down that Chronograph Sorcerer by 1,000 points. So that is a lot. We're just going to have to see if that's going to be enough. Like, if that can last for the turn, he might be able to get back in this, but it's going to be a tough climb for sure. So play is passed back to the Pendulum Magician player. He's going to switch Chronograph to defense mode. That's really all he can do. Wow. And that's it. He just passes turn. So now we have an area 0. He's going to go ahead to get a copy of Ray. And now he might be able to just go off and just actually turn this around. That's crazy that Chronograph Sorcerer actually locking that extra monster zone is so detrimental to the Pendulum Magician player at this point. And now he gets to go ahead and get a card there. I mean, this is huge. So many options available. Remember, he has used the Kagari already. He's only used 1 Shizuku, 1 Hayate, so he does have the ability to attack directly once again with Hayate. Possibly send another spell just to up that spell count even more. There's the Ray coming down. He's going to go ahead and attack Chronograph Sorcerer with the Ray, and then he's going to attack with Shizuku directly for the 1500. Now, Ray being there does turn off any Sky Striker cards. He's going to go ahead and upgrade here, though, it looks like, into possibly... I mean, maybe a Hayate? He's going to go for Hayate just to give himself that downward pointing arrow. And there's another Shizuku. Okay, so Shizuku is going to use its effect in the end phase now. And now he's going to use Shizuku to add that Hercules base to his hand. Now remember, this is in the end phase, so he's not going to be using anything else. Shizuku, again, powering down those monsters by a very significant amount. We have at least 10 spells in the graveyard minimum, and the Sky Striker player the Pendulum Magician player scooped it up. Oh my god! That's insane. So the Sky Striker player actually managed to pull it off against the odds with probably like 1,000 life points left. That is insane. So we're going to game 3 here. The Pendulum Magician player allowing the Sky Striker player to go first. Maybe this is going second Sky Striker build, and the fact that the Pendulum Magician player was forced to go first in game 2, maybe he's acknowledging that, and that's why he's allowing the Sky Striker player to go first in this game 3 to just make sure that he's going to have as many combo cards as possible. I see a Ghost Ogre in hand for the Pendulum Magician player, which is big. That means he can stop any sort of multi-roll recursion shenanigans, and he should be in a pretty solid position going into his turn 1 here. So we'll have to see. We see Ray coming down, tagging out for Kagari, adding back a copy of Engage that he already added activated previously, and here comes the multi-roll. Again, with multi-roll only being at 1 copy, it is very weak to removal now. And again, with stuff like Ghost Ogre, there's plenty of spell and trap removal in the format as well. That multi-roll is very susceptible. We do see multi-roll being activated to prevent any of his spells from being negated, and it looks like he had a copy of Metalfoes Fusion sent off that multi-roll, so he's going to go ahead and shuffle that back into the deck for a fresh draw. Now at this point, he's just going to try to get as many of those cards as possible. There's an Engage. That's a good rip. So now he's going to go ahead and get a tick up on the multi-roll here. He's going to search Widow Anchor. At this point, he's just going to try to set himself up as much as possible. And like I said, if you're the Pendulum player in this position, and if you're playing the Endymion engine, just try to get to Master as quickly as possible, because if you can, like I said, I don't think they really have an out to it. So we see a tag out for Shizuku. We're going to go ahead and see Shizuku activate in the end phase, and then multi-roll is also going to be able to activate in the end phase as well. 2 sec cards. Oh, possibly 3. We'll have to see. It looks like he's going to go ahead and check his grave there to see what he's got. And again, he can prioritize Shizuku first and then multi-roll to possibly get another card back there. Sky Striker player's thinking about it. He's probably thinking about how he wants to sequence things. So it looks like he's going to go Shizuku first. Shizuku is going to go ahead and search probably a Widow Anchor, maybe an Eagle Booster, just to further protect his board even more. We already know he has 1 Widow Anchor, and so one of those back row at this point is an unknown. He's going to go for a second Widow Anchor. Okay, so that could indicate that he already has the Eagle Booster too, potentially, unless he just wants the multiple disruptions. He's going to use that Widow Anchor in the end phase, targeting Shizuku to get it in the grave and tick multi-roll up one more time, and there is the Ghost Ogre. So he does still have to play through 1 Widow Anchor, potentially another back row, and any other hand traps that the Sky Striker player may have, but having a full grip of cards is going to be, I mean, again, when you're a combo deck, that's pretty much exactly how you want to see it. When you're starting with Spell Power Mastery, that's going to be exactly what you're looking for. Like I said, if you're trying to turbo into that copy of Servant, that copy of Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic, as quickly as possible, Spell Power Mastery is exactly the way you want to go. So there's a Servant, there's a Duelist Alliance. We're going to see if this prompts a response from the Sky Striker player. Doesn't look like it, so he's going to go ahead and search for Duelist Alliance, searching for a Pendulum card, or a card with Pendulum in its name. It's going to go for Pendulum Call, so that will put 1 counter on the Servant. Pendulum Call could put a second one on Servant, potentially here. He does have a 3rd spell in hand. I see it on the far left. So again, if he can just get all the spells that he needs, he does have Pendulum monsters as well, so those do count as spells. Pen Call, pitching the other copy of Spell Power Mastery in his hand. Remember, Spell Power Mastery is only a once per turn effect. So now he's going to go ahead and Pen Call here for 2 Pendulum monsters. This is great because, like I said, the Pendulum monsters do count as spells when they're in the Pendulum zone, so that will be able to tick up the Servant once again. And that's going to put him in a pretty prime position because Widow Anchor can't really stop any of this. I don't know what that other set back row is. Again, that's a very hard to define unknown at this point. But it looks like the Pendulum Magician player is going to grab a copy of Harmonizing. He could go for a copy of Purple Poison. That might be the next best option. I'm curious to see what he's going to go for. Oh, possibly a Dragon Pit Magician. That would be nice to be able to take out one of those back row cards if he wants to go ahead and go for the discard. I believe he needs a Magician in the other scale for him to do that, though, which Servant's currently there. Looks like, I believe that might be a Dragon Caller Magician. Dragon Caller Magician or Aether. I only got a quick glance of it, so I couldn't see for sure. But I'm sure we'll find out at some point here. Oh, is it? No. Curtain Raiser was in his hand because that's not a Pendulum card. Or that's not a Magician, excuse me. So there's Curtain Raiser putting the 3rd scale on. Summon limit coming down. Okay, so that's 1 summon now from the Pendulum Magician player, but it doesn't matter because now he's going to be able to go and summon his Endymion using its effect with 3 counters, as well as his Endymion Mighty Master of Magic. And why this is significant is because this is a simultaneous summon. So under summon limit, I believe this only counts as 1 summon because the monsters are being summoned simultaneously. The players might be checking to see if that is how this works. And if it is, that would be huge. It's kind of like when you have a card like Max C, for instance. That's kind of like what I'm thinking, where when you special summon multiple monsters at the same time with your while Max C is active, you only get 1 draw, even though they summon multiple monsters at once. So we see he's going to go ahead and bring out that Endymion, and both of those both Servant and Master are going to get an Endymion, or excuse me, an Endymion. They're going to both get a spell counter on them, and that does give that Endymion protection from targeting and destruction effects. Summon limit would be pretty strong here if he didn't already go for the Endymion play, or if he didn't already have the spell counters for Endymion. So like, let's say he would have summoned like a Dark Worm from the graveyard to build up his spell counters, or maybe would have summoned like a Time Gazer Magician off a Chronograph Sorcerer. That would have been really clutch because then he would have been locked out, preventing him from going into Electromite, different things like that. It would have been pretty significant, but in any case, this is the position we see ourselves in. So Endymion's going to attack over Shizuku. That Endymion is losing 400 attack currently from the Shizuku, so it's still pretty large, definitely over 1,000 damage at the least. Ray is going to resurrect itself. It's nice because Sky Striker do play pretty decently under summon limit because they only really summon twice a turn for the most part anyway, but they can also do it on the opponent's turn when their Ray or whatever one of their Sky Striker ace monsters is being threatened. So if it's if summon limit's something you haven't been trying out, you may want to try it out for yourself. It's a pretty solid card, especially with these monster heavy combo decks running rampant here. So now we're going to go ahead and see the Ray tag out for possibly a copy of Hayate. Hayate will be able to attack directly here if he so chooses. That would allow him to send another spell to the graveyard. But again, now that especially that he has summon limit out, it's going to be even more difficult for him to deal with this Endymion. The Pendulum Magician player will take 1,500 damage here. That is the first damage that he's taken. And now at this point, Kagari is gone, so he does not have the recursion from that card anymore. Multi-roll is also gone, so a lot of the recursion from Sky Striker is sitting in the graveyard. There is still ways to recur it like Hercules base, but he does have to search that out at this point, so it's going to be a little bit difficult for him to come back here, especially under his own summon limit, because the typical outs to Endymion that Sky Striker plays are in the form of like Link 4 monsters. So I'd be curious to see how he's going to go ahead and achieve this. Sky Striker player looking through his extra deck, maybe trying to contemplate his options here. He's probably going to tag out that Hayate for a Shizuku at the very least. But even if he does, that can just fall very quickly to the Endymion. Endymion has a pretty high attack value. Shizuku would have to have at least like 15 spells in the grave to be able to power that down just enough. He does set another card in the back row though. Maybe that could help. And remember, these are sideboarded games. And there's an Ogre for the Shizuku. Okay. So what's interesting here is that will force out Ray to come back, I believe. And it looks like he's going to go ahead and grab the Shark Cannon off of Shizuku's effect, because Shizuku does still resolve. And the Pendulum player extending the handshake, and it looks like that's going to do it. I'm not sure if the players went into time, but like I said, Endymion just is a very oppressive threat for the Sky Striker matchup. And that's going to do it. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and we'll see you next time.